Hey everyone, welcome to this session. In this video, we're going to cover um, pretty much what I get asked every time a new person starts using Unreal Engine, and that's what sort of computer do I need? So hopefully we'll go through these, pardon this video being a slide deck, but yeah, it's the easiest way to convey the information. So if I quickly go into the first slide, we'll have a look at what's the sort of recommended hardware that Epic have determined which will work with Unreal. So you can see here the operating system is, if you're using a PC, that is should be Windows 10. So anything earlier, Windows 7, 8, if anybody's using those, are a no go. If you are using Windows 10, you should be on version 20H2 or higher. That's what I would encourage you to be on. If you were looking for a PC to run it, hardware wise, you're looking for a minimum of a quad core. So it's a 4-core Intel or AMD processor, which runs at 2.5 gigahertz or faster. So again, anything in the last probably 8 years would be at that minimum level. So you should be fine. So off the top of my head, like an AMD 1600 should be fine. An Intel 7600K, something like that, at the absolute lowest. Unreal also likes its what you call memory usage. So even though the minimum recommended hardware on Epic's website is 8 gigabytes, really you would be looking for a machine that would have 16 gigabytes at a minimum, in my opinion, after seeing people use it on a day-to-day basis. Then probably one of the most important parts when using Unreal is the graphics card, the thing that actually draws the content onto the screen for you. So they're saying a DirectX 11 or 12 compatible graphics card. I've given a few examples there of what I would think would be the absolute minimum you should look for. So something, I think the GTX 970 was out almost 6 years ago or so. So I believe it had 6 gigabytes of video memory on it, which again should be suffice as a minimum to run Unreal 5. Preferably you want to get something newer if possible. So even if you move up to something like the GTX 1660, that would be a better experience using Unreal for you. If you have an NVIDIA or an AMD card, you must have an RX 580, 8 gigabytes as a minimum. So if you have like an RX 550, anything like that, then it is not going to work. So realistically, that's your lowest sort of benchmark for AMD. Another key thing with Unreal 5 is storage. So each install of the engine alone on a hard disk takes about 50 gigabytes. But as you use the application, you will create projects which will be quite large in size. If you then started to use assets from the marketplace or Megascan Quixel assets, your hard disk will fill up very quickly indeed. Now, if you have only a mechanical drive, so that's what it means there by a 500 gig SATA drive, that will be incredibly slow at loading the application, and it will not be a nice experience at all. So I would be saying that you should look to pick up a 500 gigabyte, what we call SSD or a solid state drive, and that would very much help the machine in regards to load times. And then the other thing that we'd look for is always have the latest drivers for your graphics card. So the latest NVIDIA or AMD drivers and the latest version of DirectX 11 and 12. But again, those should be updated alongside Windows. So that's your minimum. That's what Epic are recommending. But Unreal, to get the best user experience out of it, you would need to sort of increase what you're wanting to spend. So I thought I would also talk about Mac, because some people try to use Unreal on a Mac. It's not a great experience, so it would be very slow. Compiling shaders, load times, again, not enjoyable at all. Even the latest machines as of 2023, based around Apple Silicon M2 chips, currently has massive stability issues with Unreal 5. And again, most people are recommending not to use it. Now, if you are building iOS applications, then you must pretty much use a Mac. But again, if you've only specific projects, from what I recall, if they're blueprint orientated, you can build them through a PC. But if you have any code within your project, C++ code or whatever, then you must build it using Xcode, etc. So that then pushes you to a Mac. There, I've included the latest, what the recommended is. Ventura, same quad core, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and then what you call a Metal 1.2 compatible graphics card. So something from the last few years, but Unreal 5 development on a Macintosh currently at the minute, folks, is not great. So software requirements, minimum things. So you've bought your minimum PC, then you need, again, as I said, Windows 10. So you must have Windows 10, and you really want to be using the latest version, like 20H2, and pretty much if there's any updates available for Windows, you should always put those in place to keep it up to date. You'll see shortly here that specific features in Unreal actually require certain versions of certain minimum versions of Windows 10. You can see here then the DirectX runtime. Again, some of these will be installed through the prerequisites. Whenever the engine actually installs initially, it'll install what you call a lot of prerequisites. So it'll do a lot of the donkey work as such when it's doing that. So that should be fine. If you get any prompts from your system for the latest drivers, again, your GPU drivers for your graphics card, always update. Just always update and make sure they're, because what they're doing is they're fixing any errors or bugs potentially there. So if you're actually developing on the engine, so if you're going beyond just using blueprints and you're want to run C++ projects, you should have Visual Studio 2019 or later, and preferably, and more than likely going forward here, would be Visual Studio 2022. If you're doing any Android development, building apps for Android, you will need to make sure your SDK version matches what Epic's current requirements are. So again, I would refer you to the Epic documentation, because that can and will change. And you can see there, if you're doing any iOS app development on the PC, you must have iTunes 12 or higher installed. So here's what Epic recommend as a good PC. i.e. some of their developers are using this in-house. So the previous PC we looked at was a minimum specification, i.e. your bare bones. So for the good PC, Windows 10, and you can see now we're up to 32 gigabytes of RAM. I think on some documentation it actually recommends 64, but 32 should be absolutely fine. You can see here now we're on to SSD drives. So you've got a first drive, which is 256 gigabytes, and that holds your operating system, i.e. your Windows 10, and then probably your install of Unreal Engine. The 2 terabyte drive then is used for your projects, Megascan downloads, Marketplace downloads. So it's always good to have a secondary drive, what you call, on your system. And you can see now as well, the graphics card itself is now up into the RTX 2000 series, i.e. the RTX 2080 Super is the one that they have noted here. And again, why that is because it would have the ray tracing capability on it for projects. So again, you're looking probably about £300 or less for that card now, if you were purchasing it second hand or on eBay. There's the Xerox Incredibuild. Again, that's the help this shader compilation thing. So that you should install that if you can. And you can see here the CPU they're recommending is at least a 6-core CPU, running at 3.4 gigahertz. So again, a processor like an AMD 3600, an AMD 5600, those would be very decent options as per the recommendation. But then if we level up, we can go to a great PC. So a great PC, you can see here we're now up to 12 cores, 24 threads, and we're using an AMD 5900X as such. So again, that will help compiling shaders, creating the projects and building them a lot quicker. We're still at 32 gigabytes of RAM. If you can push to 64 gigabytes, that's even better. You can see now the GPU, we're up to the NVIDIA RTX 3070 series, or the 3000 series. Again, very powerful. They will, be suffice for many projects, and load even the most demanding projects. And you can see now we also have 2 separate hard drives still. And again, that's what I would encourage going forward for anybody using Unreal. The first drive has your operating system applications, and the secondary drive is the projects drive. So if then you have money no object, you can buy the latest and greatest CPUs as of 2023 here when this video has been made. So something like the AMD 7950X, soon to be 7950X 3D, has 16 cores, 32 threads, runs at 5+ gigahertz. I would encourage you to go to 64 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM, and the GPU is the best as of early 2023 here, the RTX 4090, 24 gigabyte version. That is a monster GPU, which would do for development for many years in the current climate. And you can see here the hard disks have been increased to 2 separate 2 terabyte drives, and they're both PCI Express 5. So that's the fastest type of hard disks you can get at the minute. So something along this line, along the spec of machine, you're probably talking up to maybe £3,500 stroke dollars. So quite a lot of money. But the way I would look at purchasing a computer is that if you're using it on a day-to-day basis and it is your main source of income and it is what your job entails, then class it as an investment, and your time and effort. The faster the machine you have, the faster your projects will load, the faster you'll be able to compile shaders. So that then may balance out the time it takes for you to create a project. If you were running on a low-end machine, the difference might be several hours of a difference, which is quite substantial if you're freelancing or if you're even working in a company. So always try and push, your budget as much as you can. The next PC is a complete another different level. So even though we have money no object, this is a production house money no problem sort of machine. So now we're using the AMD Threadrippers, which are effectively 64 core 128 thread CPUs, probably several £1,000s for that CPU alone. We're now up to a minimum of 128 gigabytes of RAM, and then you're running the fastest GPU in the world at the minute for a machine. Would be an NVIDIA RTX 6000 ADA card, which on its own is probably about £8,000. And then similarly, as long as you've got multiple NVMe hard drives for projects and disk space. So this machine here, if you were to purchase it, probably £12,000 stroke dollars, a lot of money. But again, you would be using this on LED stages, cinematic production, that sort of stuff. So the more threads, the 64 cores there would help massively for compiling shaders, building projects, creating source builds of Unreal Engine. But again, probably a way beyond the budget of most ordinary folk. So for specific features within Unreal, there is actually minimum requirements as well. So you can see here, to use Lumen on a computer, you will need, if you're only using software ray tracing, then a DirectX card of version 11 or so would be fine. But really, if you're wanting to get in the Unreal Engine, you should invest in a card that can do hardware ray tracing, i.e. the NVIDIA RTX 2000 series, so that 28 Super or something higher. And again, making sure your version of Windows 10 is fully up to date is a prerequisite there. So if you have anything less than that, so likes of the 970, etc. we mentioned earlier, that won't be able to run Lumen, unfortunately. It'll still run Unreal, but you won't get the Lumen features. Nanite as well. Similarly, you need the latest version of Windows, latest drivers. But notice the point at the very bottom there. If you're a Mac user, it's very unlikely that the Mac OS will ever support Nanite due to the features and functionality on a Mac being incompatible with how Nanite gets handled. So that may be a massive feature of why you may not go for a Mac. Virtual shadow maps, again, latest version of Windows 10 is required, and more than likely it'll be Windows 11 by the time, I would say, mid-2023 comes around. And you can see there shader model 6 must be enabled in the project settings, but I believe from the latest versions of Unreal 5.1, etc., that is enabled by default. And again, latest graphic drivers, folks, always for the likes of Nanite, Lumen, and virtual shadow maps, because there has been glitches and issues with high likes of ray tracing shadows, etc., have been handled on machines. So the latest graphic drivers, latest updates to Unreal as well is always very beneficial. So the summary then is, buy the best CPU you can with the fastest clock speed and the most cores as possible. Get as much RAM as you can. I would probably say minimum 32 gigabytes, and then hopefully maybe update at a future point to 64. Get a few fast NVMe, or if that's out of your scope, then SSD drives, and definitely buy the best GPU you can. Currently, I would say if you're doing Unreal development, NVIDIA graphics cards will be the better choice due to the ray tracing features and functionality on it now. AMD do have some fantastic GPUs, but unfortunately, how Unreal gets handled with ray tracing, the RTX 4000 series, so the 4070, 4080, and most certainly the 4090 are amazing GPUs for Unreal 5. And then just general housekeeping things for software side of things, keep your Windows up to date. Make sure all your system drivers are up to date for stability, because Unreal will crash at times, so you want to minimize any potential hardware issues. So make sure your drivers are up to date, and you can see there especially your AMD and NVIDIA graphics card drivers. And then probably most importantly, keep Unreal up to date. So as of today of making this video, I believe Unreal 5.11 was released, which was an update which fixed 350 issues that were identified in Unreal 5.1. So again, as long as it's within the same version window, so if you went to Unreal 5.2 and you tried to migrate your project, you may have issues, but as long as it's within the same 5.1 arena, then it should be absolutely fine to do that without having to make any substantial changes to your project. So hopefully that was useful. So good luck with Unreal, and good luck with your purchase.